Okay, ghosts are real. Story 1, emergency alert. Emergency alert. This is not a test. Immediate threat for residents of Withell counties. Be wary of. Frozen, halfway through a forkful of Kraft mac and cheese. I sat bolt upright and turned around to look out the window. The sky, as I thought, was crystal clear. A few clouds, but nothing crazy. No rain, no thunder, nothing. Confused, I turned off the TV, erasing the alert from the screen. My two dogs came walking over to me, and I patted them on their heads. One of my dogs, the other's brother, was shaking profusely from the buzzing noise that always shows up on Amber Alerts and the like. I left them in the living room and walked through my kitchen and onto my front porch. My neighbors, too, were standing outside their houses, all looking at the sky in bemusement. An immediate threat? It doesn't seem like it. I thought as my phone started buzzing with the same tone. One by one, everyone else's phone started ringing. I should explain, I guess, that I have never experienced a severe weather warning for real. Not once in my life. I suppose it should come as no surprise, seeing as I live in Oregon, of all places. I supposed maybe it was just a mistake. But just as the thought floated across my mind, I heard the siren. The siren of the squad car coming down the street. An officer talked through the speaker. "This is not a drill. Please enter your homes immediately. Do not go outside under any circumstances." Never the kind of guy to ignore higher authorities, I entered my house nervously, turned off all the lights on the above-ground floors, and took my dogs into my basement with a sleeping bag, some food, my phone, a charger, some spare batteries, flashlight, and other essentials. I called my brother, who lives a couple of blocks away, and asked him if he had gotten the message he had. I considered saying we should stay together to wait out the storm, but then I figured we'd probably get in trouble for that. So I hung up, got comfortable in my sleeping bag, and started browsing the net. Eventually, I fell asleep, seeing as I was under stress and had woken up pretty early. When I woke up, I realized that I still didn't hear any rain. Seriously, nothing at all. More confused than ever, I decided to see if the alert had been called off. I turned on my phone and called my brother again. It went straight to voicemail though. I gave up. I decided to risk it and go upstairs. I had to squeeze between the door and the wall to keep my dogs from following me upstairs. But I won, and they stayed in the basement. I walked through my kitchen to the front door and looked out the window. As I squinted to see outside in the dark, strange, seeing as it was only 2 p.m., judging by my clock, the TV flickers briefly. I looked around it and it flickered again, but this time every device on the ground floor flickered. Thinking little of it, I turned around and looked through the door again. Every house in the block had its lights turned off. Nobody was outside, except for one teenage girl. A thin, short-haired girl wearing what looked like a pillowcase walked unsteadily down the street, fairly slowly, looking as though she was having some difficulty. I turned around, now extremely confused and worried, and got the dog's food bowls, which I'd forgotten earlier. When I looked up, one of the houses, the one diagonally across from mine, right next to the house across the street and to the left, had its lights on and one of its windows broken. I shuddered and rushed back into the basement as the lights flickered intensely. I locked the door of the basement and sat on an old tattered couch that I had brought down here. The basement is where I put everything I didn't have room for. So yeah, it's packed. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention something that may be worth noting. I live in a small town, a very small town, probably with a population of under 500 or less. As a matter of fact, it isn't even on most maps. We never make any news, and we never have any scandals or anything. This is the first interesting thing that's happened, I think, since Mrs. Blank lost her dentures to a raccoon. So it's possible this whole thing seems way worse than it is. Call me crazy, but until a few minutes ago, I was thoroughly enjoying myself. I love these scenarios, and my basement is totally secure, so I'm having the time of my life. Well, I was. I decided to turn on my radio. What harm could it do, as long as I didn't turn the volume up too high? I was surprised to find that our local radio station was still up and running. They were talking about the weather, so I listened hard for any news that I hadn't heard. There wasn't any. They were just as confused as us. Not wanting to listen to crappy pop music indefinitely, I tuned into another station. This was one I hadn't heard before. "Could you give me the status of blank county?" Over. "No new developments." Over. "Okay. Any fatalities?" Over. "What part of no new developments do you not understand, McKellen?" "A squad car will be passing through soon as scan the area for the target." Over. "Any ETA on that?" Over. "No, not yet." Over. "And any word from HQ Jones?" Over. "No, McClellan, not yet. Not since 013 first got out." Over. "Well, let me know if and when they contact you." Over. At that point, I lost the signal. Well, not really, but the connection got so weak that I could barely make out anything they were saying. I figured I must have found a police communication channel, and I had been left with no answers whatsoever. That was about 45 minutes ago, as of me writing this now. Guys, I don't know what's going on. Do any of you live near me? You'll know if you've received the warning. I'd say what county I live in and which ones were affected. but I don't know for privacy reasons. I have to admit, I'm a little bit jealous of this guy's excitement over the emergency alert. I mean, sure, it's scary and all, but there's something thrilling about being caught up in the midst of something mysterious and potentially dangerous. But on a more serious note, it's definitely concerning that there is an emergency alert with no clear explanation, and the fact that the radio station didn't have any new information is definitely alarming. I hope that everything turned out okay in the end, but I wonder about that girl you saw. Story 2. The one day I woke up late may have saved my life. One day, when I was an elementary schooler, I think probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mom in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the morning, this meant that I too overslept. And now there was just no way I was going to be ready for school early enough to get on the bus. IRC, school started at 8 a.m., and my bus pickup time was 7 a.m. But it was already like 6:40 or something, and I was still in my pajamas and hadn't even had breakfast yet. So Mom decided that today we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there at the dining room table eating breakfast, still in my pajamas, and it's now about 6:50. We hear the bus pull up about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mom peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus doesn't pull away. There's a knock at the door and Mom opens it to find a man in a bus driver uniform. He explains that he's a substitute driver because the regular driver called in sick. He says he knows he's a few minutes early since he wanted to get an early start on the route since he didn't know it well. Mom explains to him that she was going to take me to school since we woke up late. He gets visibly upset and says that he can wait a few minutes since he's already running ahead of schedule. My mom insists that no, I won't be ready to go in a few minutes, and tells him to go on ahead. He seemed angry about this but turned around and got back on the bus and left. I returned to eating my breakfast and still don't have my school clothes on at this point. But at 7 a.m. sharp, another bus pulls up to my house. Mom thinks this is weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside looking terrified, but doesn't really say anything about it and tells me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what had happened, but Mom would end up telling me a few years later when she went to the second bus. She found out that it was being driven by my regular bus driver, and it was full of all of the other kids that are usually on the route. The other bus was empty, by the way. Mom asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. "I never called in sick. There's no substitute driver on my route," he says. The driver immediately dispatched in a panic and told my mom to go inside and call the police, which she did without me knowing, and report this incident. There was absolutely no one driving my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely a kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again. Not even if someone else ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver. But chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would have never made it to school or back home. And if Mom hadn't overslept on that specific day, I would have been on that bus. It's a good thing your mom was there to protect you and knew something was off about that substitute driver. It's always important to trust your gut and be cautious, especially when it comes to the safety of ourselves and our loved ones. I'm glad everything turned out okay and that you were able to share this story with me. Story 3. The results from my DNA genealogy test shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. My family, the Antonovs, always boasted proud Russian heritage. My grandparents on both sides of my family migrated from the USSR when they were children. My father always told me the stories of his grandfather, Maxim Antonov, who migrated to the United States with his family, with only $6.55 in his pocket. However, we knew very little past Meskism, with all of this new DNA genealogy test now readily available. I thought it would be fun to surprise my parents by getting a better picture as to our ancestry. I secretly purchased a test kit and sent in my sample. Some 6 weeks later, my heart jumped when I saw the notification that my results were ready to view. I eagerly opened the chart, hoping this would bring insight and clarity for my family. When I opened the results, however, I found only confusion. There wasn't any Russian listed at all. I showed 62% Scottish, 11% Welsh, 10% German, 8% Italian, 5% Arabic, and 4% Indigenous American. I figured if there was one person who might be able to explain this one, it would be my father. My father was rarely a person to be quick to anger, but when I showed him the results, he lost his mind. He yelled at me worse than any other time in recent memory, shouting explicitives about fraudulence and incompetence. He demanded that I delete the results and never speak of it again. I never felt so let down, but alas, I deleted it and tried to forget. That only lasted for 2 days, however, as this morning I received a call that would change everything. "Is this Max Antonov?" asked the caller. Yeah. "Who's this?" I replied with uncertainty. "This is Detective Reynolds. I need to have a word with you, privately." I was concerned, but my parents weren't home, so I hopped on my bike and pedaled to the station. The officers were very kind. Too kind. I could tell something was off. "We need to talk to you about your DNA test," said Detective Reynolds. "Your profile matches a murder victim in a cold case. I really don't know how to explain this to you, but that victim could be your mother." "That's not possible," I assured him. "My mother is alive and well." "Max, the victim was found murdered and her 3-week-old baby was missing and never found. The crime happened on January 6, 2003, which is the date you listed as your birthday. Look, I know this is a lot, but we'd like to take your fingerprints so we can compare them to the fingerprints on the birth certificate of the missing baby." All I could do was nod. Hours passed as I waited for the results. They said they were rushing, but it felt like days. Finally, Reynolds came into the room. He put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a pitiful look. "Son, I'm sorry to say, it's a match." Story 4. Sadist. He's gagging on his own vomit. I drove my fist into his back. He's not dying now. The force makes him cough, unblocking his airways. I did the math. Force feeding him that many tablets should have been just enough to make him sick, but not kill him. I guess he's more pathetic than I thought. Next, I take a rope and fasten it to the rafters on the ceiling. I fashion a noose out of the other end and hook it round his neck, making it painfully difficult to stand normally. But he can just about breathe if he stands on his tiptoes. Eventually, I get it right, but he doesn't seem grateful. I laugh at his indignant, spluttering face. He takes a ragged breath. "Let me down. Are you some kind of sadist?" That's exactly what I am. Who would have thought that Mr. Lowe would be such a good judge of character? After an hour of watching him snort and salvo like a farmyard pig, I let him down. After catching his breath, he tells me my wife knows where I am. The police will be here any minute. So full of misguided hope. I'd already told Mrs. Lowe that I'd be taking care of her husband this afternoon, that I had a wonderful set of surprises for him. She thanked me and gave me a freshly baked apple pie for my troubles. I consulted my list. Waterboarding was next. How fun. I'd always wanted to see how that looked in real life. We spent a lovely hour with him gargling and spluttering. "See," I tell him brightly, "it's basically backward swimming." There's just one final thing on my list. I get to use my biggest favorite knife for this one. I slowly trace it down the veins in his forearms. Not too deep, mind. I want him to be conscious. "Mr. Lowe," I start formally, "do you know that you've taken 6, almost 7 lives both directly and indirectly?" He looks up at me, weak and pale. A dawning realization starts across his face. "Sally Anderson, 9 years old when you killed her. Her mother took an overdose a year later." He starts to deny it, but I interrupt. "Timothy Castus, 8 years old when you stabbed him. His brother hanged himself just last year." He just looks at me. "Ben Wallace, 15 when you murdered him. His father drowned himself 2 years ago." He has nothing to say. "Finally, Melinda Lowe. You started beating her in the first year of your marriage. You know she slit her wrist 3 times over the course of your married life, but you've always managed to find her in time." He hangs his head, muttering something about me being a psychopath. I'm no psychopath. He had it right the first time. Professional sadists at your service. Available to hire for a price. Discounts available if they deserve it. Mrs. Lowe only had to pay for an apple pie. Story 5. Ghosts are real. I am right now sitting on my front porch smoking a cigarette. I cannot bring myself to go back inside my house. There is someone in there. Just over 2 months ago, I moved into a new house after losing nearly everything to COVID. I won't go into details or draw this out. Typing this out is making my eyes well, and every hair on my body stands straight up. But goddammit, I saw a human-shaped shadow in my walk-in closet. Am I going crazy? Maybe, but I know that I am not at the same time. Okay, this is what happened. I'm laying in my bed, browsing the net, and from the corner of my eye, I catch movement from my closet. Within literal milliseconds, I turn and see someone standing inside of it, looking right at me. You guys, I flipped out, sprung up, ran out of my room, slammed the door, and grabbed a kitchen knife. I yelled and screamed about calling the police, that I had a knife, and basically acted like a scared monkey. No response. After about a minute of yelling and realizing I had left my phone in my bedroom to call 911, I slowly peeked in. There was simply nothing there, you guys. Nothing. No one could have gone anywhere. I'm pissed and terrified about this. I saw this person. I saw their shape, their movement, their arms. There was a humanoid figure in my closet, and that is all I know. I don't know what to do from here. Oh boy, that's definitely not a situation you want to find yourself in. I mean, I'm all for spooky stories and horror movies, but when it comes to real-life encounters with possible intruders intruders in your home, that's a whole different ballgame. So, to this person, I say, stay safe, keep your phone nearby, and maybe invest in some extra locks for your doors and windows. And if all else fails, a good old-fashioned baseball bat might do the trick, but hopefully you won't have to use it. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.